Greetings, everybody. Salaam alaikum. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you're tuning in from. The Quran says, وَلَا تَقْنَطُوا مِنْ رَحْمَةِ اللَّهِ. Do not despair of Allah's mercy. And in the spirit of not despairing and clinging to hope and being sustained by hope, a group of us thought it would be timely and useful to have a conversation about Muslims and mental health, especially in today's context, by which I am referring to pandemic times. It has changed life for all of us and brought in unfathomable pressures to bear on all of us. Some of us are struggling to deal with these side effects, and that's one of the things that we're going to be talking about today. But on behalf of the Shaykh Fadhlalla Haeri Foundation, I would like to welcome you all to this session. And if we have good feedback and sufficient interest, we will hope to develop a series of further programs, perhaps zoning in on specific topics. For today, though, our discussion will be broad and general, and we will not be touching on the more serious psychoses that people suffer from. We are keeping it with the range and the ambit of the normal sort of range of challenges that we all experience. Now, if you're a Muslim, you do believe that Allah's rahmah is written upon every situation, Allah's mercy, that is. But sometimes it's not easy to perceive it. And we wonder why. What is preventing us from perceiving it? Allah also tells us in the Quran that with every difficulty there is ease, and with that difficulty there is ease. And traditional commentators say that that means there are two eases with every difficulty. So there is sustenance, there is provision, there are resources available for us. How do we access them? Hopefully we will be able to point towards them today as well. So if we know that these words are true, we would surely not worry or be anxious or fearful about anything. But because of what the virus has done to us, nowadays more than ever, we are anxious and fearful. And something so minuscule and invisible to most forms of visible detection has placed the whole world into a pandemic mode. And it's this that has triggered the desire to have a useful conversation about it with some of my dear friends and fellow wayfarers on the Sufi path to awakening. So we need to be thinking about mental health. It is, in fact, the proverbial elephant in the room. And the need is there to discuss it because there's so much confusion, misunderstanding, and worst of all, stigma attached to poor mental health. And the stigma itself, in turn, creates more suffering. So we need to be thinking differently about it. But how? How should we be thinking about it? What do we need as Muslims to be aware of in the bigger picture if we are to navigate through challenging times without making it harder for ourselves? And to that end, I've invited our participants to join me in mapping out what mental health means in a time of pandemic to people of faith. Well, Stephen Abdullah, it was you who articulated this mapping most succinctly. But before I turn to you first, I would just want to say something about each of the participants today. Yakuta Morton is a dear friend, a fellow wayfarer on this path, a great grandmother, a community health educator, and a specialist in traditional Chinese medicine, and also a permaculture designer. Shabnam Dharamsi has spent a lifetime of raising awareness around mental health issues. Previously, she was in the drugs and alcohol fields, race and social justice, HIV and AIDS, sex and relationships, and holistic spiritual well-being at the individual, community, and research strategic level. For many years now, her primary focus has been in the development and teaching of an accredited Islamic counseling course in Britain, the first course of its kind, and she is also a practicing psychotherapist and counselor. Stephen Abdullah Maynard also has a background in social policy, psychology, humanistic counseling, and he works through his company in the public sector and with NGOs as a counselor, consultant, and trainer. He's also worked extensively with government departments in Britain, like the Department of Health, the Home Office, the Department of Child, Schools and Families, etc. It's a long list. He has also written the 2007 Muslim Mental Health Scoping Report for the Department of Health and Social Care. Together,
when we can become, it's also a situation in which we are actually being tested in terms of our spiritual integrity, even though we're actually struggling at a psychological level. I suppose one of the things about trying to talk today in this conversation about mental health, these trying times, and there's more happening than just a pandemic for us as Muslims, is that these trying times are affecting us in terms of how we live in the immediate and how we live in relation to the eternal, and how we therefore bring these two things together in harmony, even accepting the fact that some of that harmony may be in the disharmony of distress or illness.
Thank you. Thank you. That is so important. The idea of harmony, and you're hinting here, I'm hearing this disharmony at living, being at one with everything that's going on and turning the negative into the positive, or just living with it, on seeing what is it telling us, living with it. Yeah, that's going to be an important part of our discussion today. Let me turn next to your partner next to you, Shabnam. Shabnam, what is your purpose in being here today?
Assalamu alaikum, Minna, thank you. Well, ditto to everything Abdullah said. But I think what I want to share is something of a personal reflection on this, because I think that one of the things that's really important in relation to mental health is what drives one. And recently I went to the Victoria and Albert Museum, and they had an artistic piece which was based on a book that I read long ago and which had a huge impact on me at the time. It's a book by Sadegh Hedayat, an Iranian writer, and it's called The Blind Owl. And when I read it at that point in my life, I thought, this man has a truth that nobody else is saying. He's able to speak to the profound despair and distress that is endemic in our world, and nobody else is daring to say it. And thank God he said it. He mirrored what was going on for me at that time, the profound agony that I was experiencing. Years later, I came back to the book. This is after spiritual transformation, and in a much happier place in my life. And I read the back of the book, and it said that 2 weeks after writing that book, the author had committed suicide. So it struck me how he, you know, our relationship with ourselves is, and how we approach life, how we can be in the same life and yet be in completely different places. And yet I think the kind of default is to assume that what life is giving us is the place that we're in, rather than what's going on deep within us. And I think this is the beginning of spirituality, just taking a step back and looking at what's inside. And so for me, the reason I'm here is because, and thank you for your introduction, is because what I'm really passionate about is that flip from death to life. And I think it's always there, that kind of space of agony or disharmony, and that space of love and being not just okay, but loved and loving, and you know, in worship or at peace, or however you want to put it, and the spaces in between.
Thank you, very poignant. Thank you so much. Yakuta Khanum, please, can I introduce you now and bring you on board?
MashaAllah. I'm touched so deeply by Shabnam's sharing, the honesty and the transparency. So often we have this sort of professional face that we think we're supposed to put on, or the sort of spiritual face, or the I've got it all together face. And I'm really happy that we've, even at the beginning, established this as a place where we can be honest and open-hearted about what we're experiencing. Because I think from that place we can be creative. I want to share that I was absolutely terrified when you asked me to take part in this. I think I experienced my first anxiety attack of my life. And I realized that I had spent a year in seclusion, and it was all very good. I was reading about the divine names and feeling very holy and wise. But the prospect of actually being opened and exposed to other people started a process that I am so grateful for, because I thought, oh, well, I don't know how I am. And I started to look inside and outside and discovered a lot. I discovered that I was scared. I was scared of other people, and I was scared of something I couldn't see that seemed to have the ability to change my life enormously. And I was also yearning for other people because I was feeling cut off. But the fear of other people made me realize that I was locked down inside. I wasn't locked down from outside, I was locked down inside. So it made me start to actually revisit something called polyvagal theory, blah, 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 science, talking about how our body responds to perception. And I began to understand that things that I had learned in acupressure and Chinese medicine and Qigong were actually techniques that would help me to regulate my response to what I was experiencing and the stories I was making up about what I was experiencing, which in turn affected how I experienced it. And that feedback loop is fascinating, and it's really worthy of so, and I also had it, I realized that in this time we live in, we are forced to say we more often. And we have access to wisdom and knowledge from many different arenas, and we have access to each other's experience and opportunity to learn from each other, which is quite unique in human history. And it's very exciting, really. So I think that sometimes in order to keep ourselves safe, which is the mechanism that we call the nafs, this mechanism in our nervous system that looks at what happened in the past, and that decides how we're going to experience what's going on, which decides how we're going to react, or actually how we're even going to perceive, is busy keeping ourselves busy, literally, while it thinks it's keeping us safe, but it actually, quote unquote, veils us from actually perceiving what's going on, both around us and inside of us. So I thought, okay, what do I have to offer? Because I'm not a psychologist. I don't have, haven't developed theories and programs and trained people. What do I have to offer? I want to just share with you some things that I learned, that I share with the people I work with, about how to center and relax and convince myself that I'm okay.
Please do. Please share with us.
Okay.
I want to revisit that also at the end, but please share something with us now.
Okay. So, as Shabnam said, it's about being present now, here and now. And most of the time we're busy thinking about, oh, I don't want that to happen again, what happened before. So we're either thinking about what happened or we're thinking about what's going to happen, but we're not here now. So how do we come here now? One way is to actually be aware of our body, you know, our introception, the vehicle that we're traveling in. So one access we have to that is with the breath. And there's a mechanism when we breathe that sends a message to the part of our body that decides if we're safe. And if we breathe slowly and deeply, the mechanism that says we're not safe goes, oh, we must be okay now. Okay, so we don't have to put off all of the alarms in the body, and we can let you rest and digest. That's how they describe it. So if you put your hand, and it's good, you can, many people just have you envision parts of your body, but there's a difference between my idea about my body and my lived experience. So we want to have a lived experience of being in a body, just for a few moments. So if you put your hand on your heart and your hand on your tummy, and close your eyes for a moment so you're not taking in messages from outside. And just, it's like we're children going into a dark, empty house with a flashlight of our consciousness and awareness, and just looking around inside with curiosity and wonder. So first, let's just see if we can find the movement of our heart and our chest, our heartbeat. Just feel it from inside. And then see if we can find the movement of your breath. Where does it happen? Is the breath mostly happening up in your chest, like around your heart? Is there some movement in your abdomen? There's usually a lot of tension in the abdomen. If you just poke around under your ribs a little bit, you'll feel that there's tight places and ouch places and ooh, don't press there, go away places. There's a lot of tension. Right? So it's not easy to move through that tension to let the diaphragm muscle move. But let's just suggest now that we're going to be with that discomfort for a while, saying that it's okay, and breathe into it. Feel that tightness move out when we breathe in. Move in when we breathe. Now let's just examine our head for a moment and our jaw. And it's lovely looking at Muna because she has a gentle smile on her face. And that gentle smile is another message we can send back to the nervous system that says we're okay. So if we relax the jaw, and then place the tongue behind the top teeth as if we're saying, oh, so do you feel the heartbeat? Are you watching the breath? Can you feel it? Can you even hear it going in and out of your nose? Smiling while connecting to your heart and your heartbeat establishes a connection, a resonance that the body experiences as everything's okay. That's one hack. Now we're going to add another piece to it by placing our hand on our forehead and on the back of our head. We'll do that. So we continue that deep breathing. And as we exhale, let's see if we can pay attention to how many heartbeats when we breathe in and how many heartbeats when we breathe out. I usually just use the kalima, la ilaha illallah. You can use anything, any phrase, happy birthday to you, doesn't matter. But just count the heartbeats and see how they connect to the breath. Just for a moment, just notice. Just doing that makes me want to yawn. So I'm going to teach you one more little hack. You place your hands out in front of you like this and link them together. And then put them over the back of your head. Like you're just leaning back, looking up at the sun. Everything is fine. Everything's wonderful. Send a message again. We're okay. Keep looking forward. Keep having your head forward. And then look at your right elbow. Move your eyes only to your right elbow. And keep breathing. Full breaths. Back to the center. And look at your left elbow. Hand still behind your head. It's almost impossible not to yawn. Or maybe a little tear comes to the eye. And we're sort of socialized not to do that in public, but it's okay. It means that we've done a good job. So just, how do you feel? Do you feel a little bit more relaxed?
Far too relaxed to continue with this podcast. I feel, I'm like, I wanted to say that I'm here because I want us to think of our deen and Islam as part of the solution and not the problem. But now I just feel so relaxed. And I'm feeling like there's some kind of coherence going on between my breathing and my heart. And I'm feeling that this really does affect what you were talking about, perception. Because in and of yourself and in the moment, there is a deep point of stillness inside us. And what you've just shown us, or I'm feeling, it just enables me to go right there, past all the white noise, all the distraction, all the coulds, shoulds, oughts, everything. Very powerful, Yakuta Khanum. But wonderful. Thank you for showing us these things. I think there is so much space for learning from you, which is why I wanted you here. On many of these kind of self-care techniques, because again, one of the things that our deen teaches us is that our provision is written for us and it's there. Everything we need is there. And whenever I feel myself that there is a lack, I challenge myself, and so that I can, I say, well, what I need must be nearby. It can't be that what I need is on the other side of the planet. It's got to be accessible. And it's just me who's in the way of perceiving that. So Allah's rahmah, kataba ala nafsi rahmah. Allah's rahmah is there. His mercy is there. So how do I access it? And as you said, remove the veils. And that dua, very powerful. Thank you so much, Yakuta Khanum. Oh, I feel that we sort of almost bypassed everything, and now I have to retrace my footsteps. Yes, carry on.
May I say something? The other reason I'm here is because I've been wanting to listen to Shabnam and Abdullah really, really share how they take the teachings that we have, this ilm nafs, from the realm of ideas and concepts into lived experience with real human beings here and now on the earth. Not only doing it themselves for themselves, but teaching other people to do it for other people. That is so exciting to me. So being able to hear from them a bit more about how they live the map, to me is really exciting. I hope that somehow we can elicit some of that from them.
Fantastic. I think they will be speaking about that right now, because they're going to help us now. Bismillah, define mental health. What do we mean by it? What are the assumptions that mental health is based on? Is there such a thing as optimal mental health? And what does the absence of healthy mental health mean? And what are some of the issues that Muslims are facing in these pandemic days? Is there anything specific? Is it different? Is it different from people of other faiths or of no faith? So, Abdullah, Shabnam, please talk to us.
Do you want to go first?
Sure, I can start a bit. I actually looked up, you're sort of saying about definitions of mental health, and I wanted to share with everybody the definition of mental health from the World Health Organization. I've just got it up here, so I'm going to read it out, quite short. It's a state of well-being in which the individual realizes his or her own abilities and can cope with the normal stresses of life, can work productively and fruitfully, and is able to make a contribution to his or her community. I think it's a good definition, but part of the reason I wanted to flag it up, and I think, you know, one of the sort of, I guess, intellectual drives that have powered our work is a realization that these sort of normative paradigms that are promoted by large institutions like the World Health Organization don't necessarily fit with Muslim conceptions of what well-being is. But also I would sort of say that, you know, globally, the sort of, I'm using shorthand, that these words are sort of so binary, but I can't think of another way of putting it, that the sort of capitalist mechanisms are so reductive of the human being. So a huge part of that definition, it's about the individual and his or her own abilities. So it's talking about being able, achievement, and it's about working productively, fruitfully, and making a contribution to the community. But there are many people and many points in our lives when that doesn't apply. And those bases are very much, you know, sort of about, you know, a kind of effect of pleasure, you know, like feel good, be positive. If I'm not happy, then there must be something wrong with me. And I think one of the things that is important for well-being in life is to understand that, you know, you can be very sad and be mentally well. That sadness and even anger is an appropriate response to certain things and certain events. That actually all these processes are really important, and also that some of the least kind of societally productive people are some of the most beautiful, transformative, amazing hearts that kind of you can spend a minute with and they just change your life. So what about that? You know, and all of these things that have, you know, that definition from the World Health Organization is not just a sentence, it's actually something upon which many programs and ideas about health are predicated. I think it's problematic because that seeps into our understanding. And one of the things that I think is really important about Shaykh Fadhlalla's teaching and what that's given me, and in part what's inspired the work that we've done. I'm sort of going to particularly refer to two books, but I mean it's really Shaykh Fadhlalla and the way that he teaches, which are Keys to the Quran and Witnessing Perfection. Those two titles, let alone the actual content, are really significant, I think, in terms of talking about mental well-being. Keys to the Quran. In other words, not a static understanding of religion or spirituality, or indeed anything. And so one of the things that I think that I've absorbed from Shaykh Fadhlalla is it's not about the outer form. It's not just about, as Allah says in the Quran, bending your knees. That's not prayer. It's what happens on the inside. And then the bending your knees follows. And sometimes it's good to bend your knees even if you haven't got the inside, because the inside will follow. So it is a recursive thing, right?
Yeah.
But that understanding was a key for me. And it said to me, it doesn't matter if you've got it or if you haven't got it, or it doesn't matter about, or I shouldn't say it doesn't matter, but it's less important what the outer form is. What is this spirituality actually mean, and how does it help us to live? Because it helped me to live. And the second thing is about witnessing perfection. And that refers back to, I think, what Fadhlalla was talking about in the beginning, about where is the harmony in the disharmony? Where's the understanding in the midst of distress? Where is the prayer in the marketplace? You know, not just when you're, like you said, Yakuta, not just when you're away and secluded. You know, and I think that's also been one of the reasons why you know, this work has been really important, because what we wanted to do was to set up an environment. I'm going to talk about the teaching, a learning environment in which our student groups would be an ummah in themselves. A place where people could be honest and say, look, I actually, maybe I don't believe anymore, or I'm having a relationship, or whatever it is, you know, like whatever it is, or I feel sad because I never did this thing that my parents wanted me to do, whatever it is, but be able to be honest and see the tarbiyah, the growth, the development, the meaning behind what they were experiencing, and actually have that as an ongoing situation, an ongoing reflection, where everybody is helping each other to do that reflection. And I really wanted that for myself, and I wanted that for those around me, so that, you know, we could really have an ummah rather than a place where, you know, quite often I think in our communities there's a lot of stigma, a lot of shame, and we go and, like you said, Yakuta, present that spiritual face, or present as if we've kind of made it, or, you know, we don't have any problems anymore. And I think it's a real danger, that spiritual bypassing. And I think one of the other important things that struck me is that, you know, we can sometimes feel like we're not good enough to kind of live our truth, to share our truth. It can feel embarrassing to share spirituality, or to speak about consciousness, divine consciousness, oneness. And I wanted to find a forum and a language and people that, you know, could share openly also that love, because that helps us, you know, and
yeah, love is such a often missing part of the discourse. We forget, it's overridden, and then, oh yeah, we remember it's all about love. Subhanallah. Fadhlalla,
It feels as though Shabnam and I are saying interlinked, complementary things. I'm going to try not to repeat. I'm going to try to build on.
Thank you.
Yet I do have to put one thing so firm and so clear. And that is this thing about the conception of health, mental health.
Mm.
Okay, now, perhaps it's just that we take the good for granted. Perhaps that's the reason why, actually, if you look at it, there's much more written about mental illness in terms of clarifying and defining that than there is about mental health.
Yes. Yes.
And again, just accepting that as a human condition, as a human trope, as a human issue, maybe that's why we then need to be really clear about mental health and mental well-being in relation to us, as opposed to in relation to anybody else. And the reason I say that is, again, reinforcing what Shabnam was saying about the actual definition that she gave, the context. It does sit within a set of thinking, an ideology, which is Eurocentric or Western, which is Greco-Latin, which is secular by default, having originated from Christian conceptions through capitalism. And what that basically means is that when we talk about health in that language, and in most places where we read people talking about health, they don't talk about the state of being that mental health actually is. So what you see in that definition is you can do this and you are okay with that. I know that this is going to sound a bit odd, but Ram Dass talks about beingness, havingness, and doingness, and being able to identify the individual in relation to those aspects. Eurocentric thinking does not consider beingness as much as it considers havingness and doingness. In Islam, we are the purpose of worship. And that purpose is fulfilled. I mean this when I say this, it may seem a bit weird. That purpose is fulfilled through our intention, niyyah. Now, if you think about that, what that basically means is I intend. I don't achieve, I don't do. I'm in that process of being about what I wish to do in worship of my Lord. That's who I am. I'm in the process of being. And that's all my story ever will be. My intentions. Because actually, as soon as I conceive it, as soon as I attempt it, it is no longer in my hands, it is in the world, and it will interact with whatever there else is, including the will of Allah. So, a European idea of mental health that stresses what we do cannot sit well with our understanding of who and what we are. Okay. And if we understand who and what we are, then we know that our mental health must be intrinsically not only psychological, but spiritual. Because we are here for one purpose. Now, that spirituality must flow through our thinking, through our emotional states, our happiness, our sadness, through absolutely every aspect of what it is to be sentient, of what it is to be a conscious human being. The trick then is, can we, in this complex world, which we create, because we create the dunya, Allah created the perfection of the art, and He put us in it, and it's our perception which enables the art to turn to dunya. So in this complex world that we create, by our intentions and interactions with it, how can we then be healthy? And if we're not healthy, then maybe we are in distress. Or maybe that distress isn't something that's just short-lived thing. Maybe it's something which we literally can call illness, a common mental illness like anxiety or depression. Or maybe it becomes so deep and so rooted that our narrative, our integrity of who we are as psychological, spiritual, emotional beings gets so distorted, so lost, that we then end up talking about things which are called serious mental health problems. But we're not talking about those today. Now, what are some of the major health issues? I think just that thing about being actually able to identify ourselves for who we are in a world that tries to identify us as something else is an issue in and of itself. Because actually, in the 21st century, so many of us live in a kind of split personality way. Inwardly, we're Muslim, outwardly with John, Jack, Jill, or whoever else in the world that we feel we have to be, as we are surrounded by people who do not reflect the reality that we know in our hearts. And it's also fair to say that though we're 1.6 billion, we don't feel like it at times. We feel like we're the minority. We feel like we're actually having to deal and address all the stuff that gets shoved at us. So that state of being is also quite often a defensive state. Now think about that. A defensive state is going to be a state that is stressed. And there is such a critical relationship between stress and mental well-being. I'm not saying that all stress is bad. A lot of stress is great. Anyone who likes going to a fairground, perfect. But there is a relationship between stress and distress. There is a relationship between stress and mental illness. So yeah, maybe there are ways in which these things are different for us. Maybe that comes down to the fact that we are, in many respects, on the outside and othered. Maybe that comes down, in many respects, to the fact that actually we are trying to live an integrated life which is not just psychological, it is spiritual, in a world that doesn't necessarily see things in that way.
Wow. I'm so enjoying that. I never heard it put that way, what you said, Fadhlalla, about the filter that Allah's perfection on of the ard gets filtered through us and it becomes dunya. I mean, that's quite something, because perception, it's like, so we have to align our perception with a bigger framework almost, a more, you know, rather than parochialize it or localize it, whilst not denying it. I think one of the things that Shaykh Fadhlalla teaches very clearly is don't deny the local, because then you can never be global. And equally, you can't understand one without the other. And denial is also a form of negation, of blocking, and blocking creates stress and more distress. Yeah, this is amazing. So we've got a lot of issues that we wanted to touch upon, and like confusion, like in these pandemic times, information, misinformation. A lot of us have been experiencing, social disconnection. The othering is increasing because of that isolation, the unfamiliarity, the fear, the anxiety about the new normal is not normalized yet. Also, huge amounts of loss, lost, absent, gaps created in families. We're suddenly dealing with a lot of grief at the passing of loved ones. And yet, what does our deen teach us? That the akhirah, the next life, is better and more long lasting, that we are just transiting through this life. So should we be miserable at the departure of people? How do we understand loss? And then we're responding to all of these issues with fear, anxiety, and then guilt and shame, which seem to me to be heavy ones, despair, and of course, depression and grief. It's a heavy range of things. And I mean, what's for me personally also is this idea of guilt, because if you're on a spiritual path, then you shouldn't be touched by all of these things. And yet we are not separate from the society. Well, there's an assumption in that, Fadhlalla. I'm seeing your reaction. But, you know, I mean, I'm working from that assumption. You know, I'm okay if I'm saying La ilaha illallah Muhammad Rasulullah, I'm doing my prayers, I'm doing my fasting, and yet you're not transformed. So something is not reaching your heart if you're not being transformed. So as a person who aspires to lead a spiritually charged life, where I fail to do this, you know, gives me guilt, shame, embarrassment, whatever. I'm not good enough. So that's another chestnut on that I think is on the roasting tray of spiritual people. But anyway, I don't want to carry on about all of these things.
Can I just say a little bit about that, Mana? I don't know.
Yes, please.
Sorry, I'm cutting you. But I think that is really, really important, and it's, you know, one of the biggest barriers for people who are signed up to a faith. And one of the things that I think is really important, and which Shaykh Fadhlalla often talks about, and which you just mentioned, is around honesty. And the verse that really comes to me is, you know, never a sign comes to them, but they turn away from it. Allah says that. And I used to think of that as a kind of a telling off, right? And I think we tell ourselves off, and then we become guilty and ashamed. And the thing about guilt and shame means that it's very difficult to ask for help. It's very difficult sometimes even to admit to oneself. So we then become cardboard copies of ourselves with sort of like, we become almost all masks that we're presenting to other people. And it's even more difficult with social media and with isolation, because we've forgotten how to share and how to be. And we just want the likes, you know, we just want the likes. But how I understand that verse now is, of course, you're going to run away from things that are painful. Of course, you don't want to see a truth that is on the edge of your awareness. Of course, because your soul is telling you that you love peace and you love harmony at all times. So who wants to take that animal self through that? Who wants to sit with the discomfort, as we're all told to do? Who wants to say, oh, actually, I haven't been present for the last 20 years, even though I'm on a spiritual path? Who wants to say, like, oh, I messed up so badly? It's so hard. It's so hard to be truthful with oneself, because there's a big cost. And that's why it's called courage, right? But also we need, I think, really, for our own sakes, you know, Allah says we don't punish you, but you punish yourselves. And I think if we can just really sit with ourselves and sort of say, like, hey, this is my life. That's my amana. That's the thing that I need to look after. You know, where is my consciousness? You know, you know, when Allah says in Surah Al-Shams, you know, the person is successful whose heart is pure, and the person fails whose heart is corrupt. I think that's a moment-to-moment thing, right? So where are you now? Not what is your biography saying? You know, where are you now? Where are you right now? You know, and do anything to make that, anything you need to, whether it's looking at your biography, whether it's going for counseling, whether it's sitting quietly, whether it's ditching people that are kind of in your face and hurting you, whether it's righting social ills, because I think social justice is a huge part of what's important, especially for people who are marginalized, or other people of color, people who have experienced intergenerational trauma, people who have had emotionally absent mothers, all of those traumas that are real and that do impact us, and which we should not deny, you know, because we're spiritual. You know, if we can sit with us and say, what is going to be helpful for my heart? You know, what's really, because that's what you've got. That's what life is. That's where life is, you know, with that. And I think that in our teachings, there are many things that can help us to have that sacredness of life, which is a reflection of the divine, really, you know, which is the breath that comes in and out, kind of, you know, involuntarily. I think that's worship, isn't it? You know, to you know, believe, I think etymologically means I would love, you know, I want this. It's the desire, it's the ishq, you know, they're like, we're longing for this, you know, we want to stretch out our hands, not in a you know, not in a formalistic way, but in a real way, and with each other. Because if one person gets it and other people don't, that's also not good enough, is it? It's also not good enough if somebody has chronic illness and trauma, or if we're experiencing a pandemic and it's isolation and we can't understand, you know, what this signifies to us. Even if the initial messages and the most real messages to us in that moment are darkness and despair and a betrayal that's felt, whether we blame it on governments or institutions, rightly or wrongly, you know, all of the ups and downs and complex layers that entails, all the decoloniality that we need to work through, all of that is all precious and important and part of Allah's rahmah, I think, that he gives us, that enables us to find that alive place in our hearts, moment to moment. If that's our birthright, I think that's the amana, that's the precious gift that we've been given. That's why Allah says, we created you in the best of forms with the potential to be higher than the angels, you know, like knowingly, as in knowing, being able to sort of say assertively, I choose that good life, you know, and also acknowledging, you know, in our own selves, our own, you know, desperation and misery, and I think they're concurrent, they go hand in hand, two sides of the same coin.
SubhanAllah. Yakuta, did you want to come in and say something? I could see you.
I was so inspired by many things that you said. You saw that. Yes.
I think everything that Shabnam has just said requires a whole program on its own to unpack and address. I mean, the importance of honesty and emotional vulnerability, you know, I mean, that's being more and more recognized in any case globally, the usefulness of that. And of course, in our path, you know, being open, being willing to be seen by your betters and guided aright, you know. Of course, the negative end, it can end up in spiritual abuse, but at the useful end, the mirroring, you know, al-mu'min mara'at al-mu'min, you know, the mirroring that you get is not only just reassuring, but it helps you, you know, forgive yourself. Sorry, I meant to ask you, Yakuta, what did you want to come in and say, not expatiate on myself here?
You said it.
Oh, fine. Abdullah, I could see that you wanted to contribute something, right, following on from Shabnam.
No, well, I'm not sure. It just does feel like repetition.
Please repeat.
So we are that interspace of being present, of being in worship. That's what we are. Now, that is something that we can be in clarity, because the condition of our hearts can be unfettered, and we can be in that niyat of service, of worship at that moment. And it's also true that the condition of our hearts can be such that they're covered in all sorts of stuff. It's also very true that irrespective of those two aspects, irrespective of those two possibilities, that can take place changing a baby's nappy, reading Quran, filling petrol at the petrol station, because we know what we're about. We're supposed to be about worship. We know what ibadah is. We know all of these big words. So this thing about being present, being honest, being in the moment, and acting with adab in the moment, that's the balance that we can have. Now, just because we can have it doesn't necessarily mean we do have it. And one of the weird things about the moment is it is beside the past and it is beside the future. So it's actually quite difficult just to be present. It's so much easier to actually be thinking about what has happened or be thinking about what is about to happen.
Yeah.
Quran talks to us about that. But you were talking about things like fear and things like despair and things like anxiety. And I can't help but wonder, are those things of this moment? Because we fear the future. We grieve over the past. Now, I'm not saying that to discount those things. I'm simply saying that to actually remind us that the trick is to be present. The trick is to be present in the moment, be it a painful one, be it a joyous one. I'm not trying to suggest that if we are simply present, then suddenly our hearts will be full of joy. That's not true. Going back to some of the stuff that you were saying earlier on, Mona, I gave you a funny look because I immediately thought of prophets who have suffered. And I thought, okay, fine, well, if prophets can suffer, then why can't we suffer? And if we can suffer, then why can't we have difficulty with that experience of suffering? And if we have difficulty with that experience of suffering, then yes, that's distress or illness. So actually, this thing about being created in toil is real, is real, is real. We are tested in ease and in difficulty. That's the fact. And it may seem that, you know, hey, I've got Islam, I'm okay, I'm on it. No, that's where the exercise book opens. That's where we start.
Bismillah, yes, fabulous. Yakuta.
May I say something there? I've had some experiences recently that made me realize that Islam was, many of the things that I call Islam or being a Muslim or beliefs, things I believe, were in the realm of concepts. There were things in my head that I could argue about, but then I've had little moments where they became lived experience, and it was really a shock because I realized I hadn't actually been what I thought I believed. Does that make any sense at all?
Perfect sense.
And I just we did this 3-day, we did an online silent retreat. And that was a really interesting process. So it was called Perfecting Your Salat. So I went online to look to make sure I got all of the movements and everything right in the salat. Okay, you know, do you see what I mean? It's the gesturing, the posturing, you know? And one thing said that you should have your elbows up in the air. You shouldn't have your arms down like a dog, right? And the sajda, the exercise was to be for an hour in sajda. Okay, I'm 74 with rickety knees, an hour on my knees in sajda, that's a challenge, okay? But I was trying to do it with my elbows up in the air, right? You know, after the first 15 minutes, my diaphragm started to tremble. And by the time we were getting toward the end, my whole body was shaking. And this is wonderful. It's a release process, you know, trauma release exercise. It's good. Animals do that when they release tied in trauma. But it was I was still trying to keep my elbows up in the air while I was
Amazing.
And then near the end, Haeri, bless his heart, said, Well, I actually found that I'm most comfortable, my body just kind of sinks into the earth, and I'm most comfortable when my elbows are on the ground. And I was like, oh, and so I actually let my body sink and let my elbows go to the ground. And then I actually tasted a moment of really connecting to the earth and feeling embedded in beingness and the beingness of the earth. You know, I went back to Torah, back to earth for a moment, but I had to let go my ideas about how things should be and what the posture is and what the rules are and all of that stuff, and actually just feel it. And it felt good, you know, and maybe from outside it wasn't correct, but it actually was transformative for me to actually just be there, you know. And then he said something else. He said, oh, when we say Assalamu alaikum ayyuha nabiyyu, when I do that, I always pause for a minute so that I can listen for the response. I was like, what? And so I realized that I was repeating things in Arabic. I kind of know what they mean, but I don't always sort of process the meaning while I'm saying the sounds. And I actually, for a moment, let myself pretend that I was actually addressing the Prophet. And that there was the possibility of a response. And I just want to talk about Akhirah for a minute, because Abdullah did a beautiful job of defining the dunya as the construct, which is what it is. It's the world we construct, because it's not out there, it's here, right? And we live in each other's constructs, which can be really disturbing, considering that almost everybody's traumatized and reacting. So life can be rough. But maybe the Akhirah isn't after. Maybe it's just the background depth of beingness now. Maybe it's another way to kind of experience it. So it's like not something you have to wait for, you know? So maybe I was like waiting for that response from the kind of Akhirah, from the eternal aspect of existence. And just to wait for it meant that somehow inside I believed it, really believed it, because I was waiting for a response from it. Maybe it seems subtle, but for me, it felt very different. Very different. And then it's about the breath. Shaykh Fadhlalla once was talking about, you know, the story of the making of Adam and the breathing of the Nafs ar-Rahman, you know, this breath of mercy into Adam. And then just at one point, I just had a moment where I just thought, what if when I breathe in this next breath, I'm going to be experiencing that moment. And just to imagine that my inhalation has come directly from the source of existence itself. In that moment, that the whole process is start right then. It's like a permission to be a little bit crazy. It doesn't fit the World Health Organization definition of being sane, because I'm transacting with an aspect of life that you can't measure. But doing that really makes me feel good. And so all I'm saying is I began to know I needed to study Arabic a bit more and study the names and everything, because I really needed to really know what I was saying, because I understood after a while that what I was saying, I believed, could be transformative if I really believed it. And I really gave myself a chance to experience it.
Yakuta Khanum, thank you for that incredible reminder of the spiritual toolkit that we already have if we just bring conscious awareness to it. I mean, the very simple things of salat and the attributes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I mean, when you interact with them on a level of intention and conscious awareness, of mindfulness, or as Shaykh Fadhlalla would say, mindlessness, remove the mind, the thought process, the calculation, and just be with it. SubhanAllah, thank you for that sharing, Ya Kutahan. But so we've actually touched on a lot of the things that we wanted to talk about, which was, you know, the intersections between, you know, well-being and religion, spirituality. We briefly mentioned the idea of spiritual bypassing, but I don't think we talked about that enough. And we've talked about some of the issues that pertain to mental health, and also the kind of the more political aspect. You know, if we put a decolonial gaze on the very idea, and then we start to see the strong strains of, you know, capitalistic thinking, power and games of power and control, politics, in short, that underlie, you know, I mean, these worthy institutions that are supposed to help humanity, how they become itself agents of its further and continued subjugation. But I don't want to go into that direction just yet. But I wanted to talk a little bit more in this space, and I think I'd like to go on for the next 20 minutes, so the whole session would have been an hour and a half. But I'd like us to talk a little bit more about bypassing, and also about emotions and ways of thinking about it, that, you know, about dealing with them. That clearly everything that you have said, Abdullah and Shabnam, have shown that it's not about having a still surface, but that the ripples are there doing their business as well. It's a sign of life. I mean, stress is life. You're breathing, you're oxidizing, you know, H2O, O2, all of these things. There's an oxidative process that is a part of burning. And so, you know, there isn't this, I just want us to clearly move away from the idea that being well means being static in some form or untouched. No, be moved, be angry, be fearful. But and this is something that I personally have learned and benefited from the technique called focusing, which is based on Carl Rogers's philosophy of the implicit. And which I understand, meaning, again, that everything that you have is within you, if you could but hear and connect to it, which is that to recognize that a part of you feels fear, a part of you feels this, a part of you feels that. It's not the whole of you. Your entire reality is something higher than that. You know, you were saying the Nafas al-Rahman. So maybe we can go back to talking a little bit more about that in the sort of 20 minutes that remain. Bismillah.
I have a request. I have a request of Abdullah and Shabnam. If you could talk a little bit about the difference between like stress, everyday stress, and trauma. You know, how it's different. We hear these words, we use these words, but I begin to understand trauma doesn't mean that necessarily they were dropping bombs on you or somebody hit you, but it could be a situation you feel trapped. Can you talk about that a little bit so we can understand more?
Okay, I'm going to say something very simple. I find it very practical. Trauma is what happens in an abnormal situation when we respond normally. So actually, trauma isn't about, oh my gosh, I've gone all over the shop, but this is the best thing I can do in a situation that is I almost swore then. So trauma is a response. It's the body trying to make sense of what cannot make sense. And I say that because it's not just the mind trying to do that. It's not just the frontal lobe. It's not just the midbrain and the hormones. It's happening throughout, cellularly, hormonally, physiologically, psychologically. A trauma can be induced by all sorts of things. They can be sudden, they can be enduring. So, you know, when we first started coming to get some idea of trauma, it was, you know, war veterans. Makes sense. Now we understand that children can experience trauma, not necessarily through neglect, but through ongoing abuse or through the witnessing of ongoing abuse. And please understand this, because when I'm saying that it's the body, the mind, the heart, the body, trying to make sense of something that does not make sense. Now see that through a child's eyes. Okay? Now, trauma isn't necessary. Trauma doesn't happen with everybody. You can have two identical twins, and one can receive what's going on outside, process it, and get by. And the other can receive what's going on outside, try and process, and they get stuck with this. Now, the other thing I want to say about trauma is that, okay, if we accept that trauma takes place because something is really wrong, we can also accept that actually with time, there can be a return to balance, either because the something outside isn't wrong anymore, we've been removed from the something outside, or we've actually worked out a way of adjusting to it. But the thing that everyone talks about in the field of mental health is post-traumatic stress disorder. And PTSD occurs with a proportion, a smallish proportion of people, wherein that initial "this does not make sense" response becomes long-term and embedded. Now, I've gone straight away to the far end of the scale. So really, I'm basically saying that when there is too much stress, we can't cope. But stress is stress, and stress comes in big amounts, small amounts. Some stress is seen positively, some stress is seen negatively. Some stress, even when it's seen positively, if it becomes too much, becomes problematic. The beautiful thing about most of that stress is we've got normally a way of working with it. And even if you think about common mental health problems like anxiety or depression, these are ways of dealing with stress wherein the me that knows who I am, who's always been here, so I know myself as a 5-year-old, I know myself as a 60-year-old, this me can understand I am anxious. This me can understand I am depressed. There is this stress, it's impacting me, I am out of kilter, because there's still that reference point. But then coming back to that thing of post-traumatic stress disorder, there are moments with PTSD where that reference point can go totally out the window. Because it's almost as though suddenly somebody will experience life as is, and suddenly they will experience life as back in the immediacy of the initial trauma again. Now, again, moving back up that scale, there's ordinary everyday stress. There's, I just got fired for no reason because the person doesn't like me. There's, I've just gone to visit the family of this person I want to marry, and I don't think that went well. There's ordinary everyday stuff. And we process that. And we process that and we feel good about ourselves, bad about ourselves, guilty, shamed, whatever. But we work through those feelings. So there's that. There's the stuff where stress becomes a cause of illness, and there's the stuff where stress becomes so impactful that it puts us in this space of trauma. Hoping that that's making sufficient sense.
Yeah, and I just wanted to add, Abdullah sort of touched on this, is that especially when significant events or situations occur with children, children aren't able to process that information because they don't have the agency and the autonomy that adults do. So they're so powerless and so vulnerable in that situation. And because the brain is not fully developed in children also, they get flooded. And that response, as Abdullah says, becomes embedded, so that when adults are experiencing PTSD, especially from, they're called ACEs, adverse childhood events, they cannot control the fear or the terror. And it's terrifying, like it was terrifying as a child, and the feeling that there is no control is terrifying, and it can cause lots of types of breakdown. It also, children and adults actually, children learn ways of surviving these things, and those ways over a long period of time can also add or become barriers to love, right? And that's really difficult, and it needs time to work through that. It needs for the person to be able to give themselves time, and it needs courage. And it's hard to take that first step because you're terrified that that fear is going to be triggered by what you've experienced. So working with trauma requires a very gentle approach so that you don't re-traumatize the person. And one of the things that I want to sort of say is that, you know, there are so many of us who have experienced trauma in different ways that we've buried under the carpet. And we are also, Allah says we come from oneself. So we are so deeply interconnected. What's happening in Afghanistan is rippling through the whole Muslim community. And I think maybe it's fair to say as well that the young people who are thinking about climate change and thinking about all of these things and thinking about what it means maybe to be Muslim or just a human being in the world today, you know, it's saying, is it real to hope? Can we really believe in this life we're living? And you guys are all talking about spirituality and, you know, like believe in God and pray. But I don't believe in this anymore. I feel so despairing and so betrayed because the world is not a good place for me. And that really needs space to be able to explore without putting the pressure of we have to get you to a good place and this has to be fixed. You know, without that pressure, because if you put that pressure or that demand on people implicitly or explicitly, then they don't have permission to sort of say, actually, I'm so upset, I'm so distressed, I don't believe, I don't care, I don't feel it, I'm not okay. And I think it's so important for all of us to give ourselves and to give each other that permission to be traumatized. You know, our world is traumatizing sometimes. We need to experience the injustice of what there is, and we need to allow that in because it is so incredibly sad sometimes, and our world needs correcting. Sometimes it is about issues of social justice that, you know, will maybe take for effort, you know, to work on, or maybe can never be worked on. So I think it's also important that, you know, part of understanding trauma is also about making space for power, miskin, our vulnerability. And I'm saying our purposefully, because there are amongst us people who are more vulnerable, and they've been more vulnerable through generations. And they are not going to be fixed in the way that we understand fixing. They're in our universe for us to make space for the hugeness of who we are, which includes profound distress. You know, I remember once a friend of mine said to me, you know, my father is okay because he can afford to take himself to Switzerland and basically live in a way which is like, you know, a very nice clinic for himself. He's just retreated from the world and he's living in the mountains, you know, and that's why he's okay. But that's not an option for everyone, you know, and I think we need to find ways of being, not just for ourselves, but for each other too. And trauma is a part of that. And the other thing I wanted to mention as well is one of the levels of saying, mapping out the difference between stress and trauma, I think is really important. But also important is that we don't deny ourselves the possibility of help because we think our stress or trauma, whatever it is not big enough.
That's
you
very
know,
important.
we think that we're not, we shouldn't access it because there are other people who have bigger problems. It doesn't matter. It's your life. So get the help that you need.
So I think, Fadhlalla, please go ahead, because we have 5 more minutes or so, and I still wanted us to move towards the traditional and emerging modalities for healing, because all of you are involved in those. But Fadhlalla, please continue.
There were a couple of things. I'll just bring one in here, and it relates to what Shabnam was saying about people getting what they need in terms of help. And I'm not talking about it from the perspective of the individual person and their individual experience. But what I do think I really want to stress at this point in this conversation is that we, as a group of people, as an ummah, as Muslims, need to understand and accept that it is not sufficient to tell somebody, oh, just snap out of it. It is not sufficient to tell somebody, oh, just make your salah and it'll be fine. I'm trying to map out this relationship between trauma, common mental health problems, and ordinary everyday stressors. And the reason that these things are in this kind of stepped relationship is because the level of autonomy that we have with the ordinary everyday is different to the level of autonomy that we have when we are experiencing a common mental health problem. So to sit with somebody and think, I understand things, you understand things, sort this out, that person who is experiencing a common mental health problem isn't in the same place. So they can't just sort things out. Much less a person who is actually experiencing trauma or PTSD. If you think about it, just think about the way that that middle bit in the brain reacts to situations, you know, fight or flight. Well, that's not all of it. There's a few other bits, but one of them is freeze. Anyone who has ever gone to, I don't know, a safari park and actually seen prey in front of a predator has seen freeze. And that is built into us as mammals. So we can get to that point where we are absolutely locked in, capable, and in need of support. So it isn't enough to simply say, oh, put yourself together, go and do your salat. People need help. And we have to have it within our hearts to help people when they need it.
Yeah, a very salutary reminder of the deep adab with which we need to not only approach people, but also think about these things and not just kind of be content with labeling and categorizing. You know, what do we know? Allah, you know, we don't know. So it's so true. And there are so many ways of approach. And I wanted us to, I mean, there's no way we can do the subject justice in this podcast, no way. But it's certainly, my mind is racing around with ideas for different programs. And one of them would be very much to concentrate on, to do one with younger people as well, because their experience, and it's what you talked about, Shabnam, about, you know, the point, seeing the future, you know, they're so vulnerable also. And the despair that is rife amongst that community. Before we had this podcast, I did spend some time speaking to other youngsters, and that came across so clearly, especially because of the isolation and the social disconnection that has happened. I mean, yes, people are connected through social media, but that actually doesn't always help. There is something about direct contact with others, you know, that makes such a huge difference. But we've touched on quite a few of these things, and Yakuta, you started right out at the beginning, in a sense, showing us your, I don't know, is this, yeah? But there's like, I mean, I just want to flag up sort of traditional and emerging modalities for not necessarily healing, but becoming more integrated and aware and conscious. And that in itself is a form of healing. That awareness surely is. And, you know, Yakuta, you made us aware of breathing and heartbeat. I'm so surprised that there hasn't been amongst Muslim community more work on breathing, but I think it's coming out because I know you are doing that work. Aisha Powell is doing that work. I mean, many of our friends and people are doing that work. And of course, breathing and chanting is all interconnected. And those rites and rituals, you can see the elements in the Sufi Hadra, for example, that there is something that has a physiological response and impact. But breathing, and then equally grounding, you know, how do you ground yourself? Walking on the earth, realigning the magnetic polarity of your body by walking barefoot on the ground. Practices of mindfulness, or paying attention to things. Dhikr, you know, the effect of dhikr and incantation, reciting things, but also with meaning, meditating, emptying out the mind. And then Abdul and Shabnam, you have been involved in the world of counseling and co-counseling. And there are so many other modalities that are available, but would you all like to just mention a few that you know about and that you would put into a toolkit? Maybe, which one of you would like to go first? I'm not talking about a band-aid. Just mention those things. We can't go into anything in great detail right now, but maybe we can devote one program in the future to discussing in more detail a lot of these. What do you think?
May I?
Yep.
Okay. There are a few things that I discovered. I studied Qigong with a Qigong master who was a communist youth. He was a complete secular person. He had no concept of a divinity or a God. It just didn't exist for him. You know, it's important to recognize that. For some people, it just doesn't exist as a possibility. Anyway, I asked him, I said, well, I learned this exercise and I just demonstrated the movements of the salat for him. And he looked at me and he said, well, that's a perfect Qigong. And I was like, oh, huh. And then one day afterwards, I was practicing the beginning of the Qigong, which is to start at the top of your head and just do that interoception, just go inside and be aware of how you are and make the intention. Abdullah mentioned the importance of intention. Make the intention to relax each part of your body as you go through. So I was standing there and I was doing that, and my intention was to start a Qigong exercise. But when I finished, I got from my head, I got all the way down to my feet, and I was completely relaxed. And then I went, Allahu Akbar. I was like, oh. And I realized that I never had ever thought to do that exercise before I pray.
Amazing.
And for sure, I don't remember to do that, but just to actually, step away from the outside reaction world that I'm reacting to and just go inside and intend to relax and be present before actually trying to do the Salat exercise would make the Salat exercise more transformative, inshallah. So that's one thing that we're doing anyway. So it's just how are we doing it? Who's doing it? Where are we doing it from? This kind of question, what state are we doing it from? So instead of asking it to produce the state, we can actually, be in the state when we do it. Anyway, then there's also some things I noticed about, I was reading a book about how to stimulate the vagus nerve. And Abdullah was talking about the vagus nerve. That's the nerve that connects the head, the heart, the intestines, connects everything, integrates. And it can give us the possibility to access being relaxed and present, right? So it's nice if we can access that. And they were giving exercises and things you can do to access that state. And they said, well, you just start at your collarbone and then you massage up the sides of your neck. And then you massage around your ears. And then you pull your ears up and you pull them down. And I went, oh, okay. Because the vagus nerve goes, it comes out of the brainstem and it goes to this area by the ears, by the neck. And I thought, oh, well, when we do wudu, we do these things. So it's just, it's science. It's just a way to engage the vagus nerve, to move into another state of beingness. And it really works. And in the ear, there's a place called shennen. So if you just hold the top of your ear, if you just grab it, you're going to grab that spot. If you just hold that spot, just massage it or hold it, when when you're doing wudu, you can actually, shennen means babal ruh, spirit gate. You have it inside of you. You've got the buttons you can push, in your own body that can help you to self-regulate. And when you pull down on your earlobes, the picture of the whole body is like a hologram on the ear. So pulling down on the earlobes actually releases that tension we get in the neck and shoulders from all the time we spend on these machines. So that's just really simple stuff that's part of life. And also singing out loud. They say the best way to engage the vagus nerve is to sing out loud. And I thought, oh yes, that's our dhikr on Thursday nights. And also when you put your hand like this by your ear, when you're doing, I found that if sitting in my house surrounded by people that don't pray, if I have the nerve to actually say the adhan out loud before my prayer, it's going to stimulate my vagus nerve. It's going to change my experience. So the little things that we just have, if we just allow ourselves to use them with awareness, they help us.
Yakuta Khanam, I'm booking you for a whole session, inshallah, of showing us the connectivity between the sunnahs that we do and the kind of the scientific sense behind it all. There is, for sure. I never forget, many years ago, you mentioned to me that when you do wudu and you put water on your head and your feet, you refresh the magnetic polarity of your body. And I always maintain that consciousness. And of course, wudu upon wudu is like light upon light, according to the Prophet ﷺ. So, and Shaykh Fadhlalla often counsels us, if you're in anger or whatever, go and do wudu, renew your wudu. And that itself does bring about some hidden magic as well, subhanallah. And it's not impenetrable, it's understandable. Thank you for reminding us that. But you're booked, Yakuta, okay? Are you agreed? I have it on tape here. Thank you. Abdullah, Shabnam, please, over to you to help us wrap up this session. And I'm hoping that everybody who has seen this program and has joined the podcast, I think there has been some technical issues, and many of our viewers will only be able to see a recorded version of it. But please send in your questions in the comments, and we will collect them and plan to make see what we have and see, can we curate a few more programs on this subject with specific focuses. So Shabnam, Abdullah, can I please ask you both to bring us to a close in some way? First you, Shabnam.
Thank you, Minette. Yeah, I think there are incredible things in our teachings which can be really useful. And I find that you know, the practice of nighttime vigil is really important, because that time is really quiet, and so your senses are not being stimulated all the time, and you naturally go inward. It's the same, I think, when you walk in nature. For me, I think the difficulty is that the world as it is now, and even more so in a pandemic, is so agitating that just even making a decision to give yourself that space is quite hard. But we do have a witnessing part of us that can sort of say, I choose not to be that consumer being, and Allahu Akbar, putting up your hands and saying, you know, it's empty, I hand it over, trust in Allah, and really understanding with everything that you have been given what that is, and letting go into that is an incredible gift.
Alhamdulillah. I know that we're talking about traditional and emerging modalities of the healing, but I don't know if there's anything more traditional than if you can be heard safely, speaking to someone who can hear you. And that, you know, that predates mental health, counseling, psychiatry, you name it. But if there is someone that you trust and you can be open and honest about yourself with, speak to them.
Powerful, so true. It's making me think of the mirror neurons and a mother looking at the child. You know, the child exists in goo goo gaga, and then when the mother looks at it and it looks at its mother, realize, somebody's recognizing me, somebody's seeing me, I exist. You know, that recognition and that being listened to and being heard is so, so important, and not to deny. So which of the bounties of your Lord will you deny? It is a bounty to have community, family, care, loved ones, even if it's just one person to listen to you. Thank you very much. That is an amazing, I pray that everybody who's listen to this has the tawfiq, the success of having somebody to hear them truly, without judgment, inshallah, and without the desire to fix as well. I know, Shabnam, you and I share a fondness for the Japanese ceramic art, or the principle of gluing together broken shards of pots. Kintsugi, kintsugoi, kintsukuroi, whatever it's called, I can't pronounce it. But it's such a, you know, there is beauty in the mendedness of things, and there is, and brokenness doesn't mean shattered, you know, it's another way of coming together. It's reconfigurations of who we are, challenging our assumptions and presumptions. We think we are, it's like that Imam Ali saying, you know, you think all the sicknesses are from you, you're not aware of it, and all of the medicines, all of the remedies are within you, but you don't perceive it. You consider yourself to be, you know, an insignificant thing, but within you is enfolded the entire universe. We'll revisit that in our next thing, because it continues. So if you want to hear the fullness of that amazing dictum from Imam Ali, we'll use it in our next program, inshallah. Thank you so much, all of you, for your time, your energy. And I must I just feel, I know that I've said it before, but I'll say it again. We've just scratched the surface. And I look forward to gathering again together with you all and others in this space to look at different aspects of what is not only a huge part of our lives, but is intimately grounded in an understanding of what it means to be human.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Great.
Alhamdulillah, shukrullah. That's my mother in the background. Just said, great. There she is. Alhamdulillah, shukrullah. Bless you all. Thank you. And I hope and pray that people have found some food for thought, heart and soul in this podcast. Thank you so much on behalf of Shaykh Fadhlalla Haeri Foundation. Jazakumullah. Thank you. May you all be blessed. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.